At the time Karen prohibited my nephew from accessing the neighborhood pool, I was completely unaware of her identity. Half a year afterward, I had uncovered her complete financial records and her full history of fraudulent activities. This journey from uninformed neighbor to investigative specialist occurred because Karen Mitchell committed one crucial error. She initiated a confrontation with a retired attorney specializing in construction law who had dedicated 2 decades to exposing fraudulent operations and possessed nothing remaining to sacrifice following the loss of his spouse. Early one Tuesday at 6 in the morning, I found myself at my front entrance wearing my robe, vapor ascending from my mug of coffee, confronting two perplexed law enforcement officers and one extremely satisfied woman dressed in tennis attire. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee combining with Karen's overpowering vanilla scent should have alerted me that this situation extended beyond simple pool regulations. How would you respond if your homeowners association busybody attempted to use law enforcement as a weapon against you? Share your most terrible HOA experience in the comment section. And prior to continuing, what location are you viewing this from? I'm interested in learning how many viewers are currently managing their own community dictators. I go by Dave Martinez, and 8 months prior, I believed I was relocating to an ideal location. Willowbrook Estates featured 127 immaculate residences constructed during the period from 2019 through 2021, including a $400,000 community swimming facility that glistened like a precious stone during dawn. I purchased the premium corner property with the pool perspective for $750,000, while similar properties sold for $650,000. I considered it worthwhile at any cost, particularly following my observation of my spouse Sarah's 3-year struggle with cancer. Sarah passed away the previous October. The residence we occupied together for 22 years resembled a gallery of recollections. Therefore, I gathered my belongings and relocated to Willowbrook for a new beginning. I had retired from practicing construction law following 20 years of battling contractor deception. I anticipated experiencing some tranquility and silence. Each dawn, I would position myself in my kitchen holding my coffee, observing the sunrise reflecting from the pool's surface, hearing the early swimmers moving through the water with their steady movements. This represented meditation through movement, precisely what my therapist specializing in grief had recommended. That marked my initial observation of her. Karen Mitchell, age 48, worked as a property sales agent, served as HOA deputy president, and possessed the showcase residence that established our small community's foundation. She consistently wore expensive athletic clothing, maintained her blonde highlights flawlessly, transported that cursed binder constantly, as though she managed a major corporation rather than a residential homeowners organization. Her marriage to City Council member Brad Mitchell signified her connections to influential individuals, something she ensured nobody overlooked. The initial several months passed wonderfully without Karen-related issues. I maintained privacy, adhered to every regulation precisely, and gradually began experiencing humanity once more. Subsequently, summer emerged, and accompanying it arrived my nephew Miguel. Miguel has reached 16 years, my sibling's child from Phoenix. He demonstrates exceptional intelligence, plans to attend engineering university during fall, and represents the nearest equivalent to a son I will possess. Sarah and I never produced children, being excessively occupied with professional pursuits, subsequently too concentrated on her medical care. Miguel dedicated his summer period with me, maintaining employment at the neighborhood hardware retailer and providing companionship to his elderly uncle. The difficulties commenced on a June Tuesday. Miguel had extended invitations to 2 companions from his summer employment to join for a pool day. They were respectful youths, the variety who genuinely expressed gratitude to Mr. Martinez without requiring prompting. We're discussing approximately 90 minutes of adolescent amusement and the periodic splash. That moment marked Karen's poolside appearance holding her clipboard like some variety of HOA executioner. The chlorine odor combined with her excessive vanilla fragrance generated this sickening atmosphere as she moved toward our small gathering. She announced loudly enough for the complete pool vicinity to perceive that she required guest authorization documents for these young gentlemen. Guest authorization documents? I had resided there for 8 months and never learned about guest passes. They represent family members, I clarified, maintaining my vocal tone steady. This individual is Miguel, my nephew, and these represent his companions from employment. Karen's expression demonstrated sufficient sharpness to slice glass. Regulations remain regulations, Mr. Martinez. HOA regulations explicitly specify that excessive guest utilization, meaning more than 2 visitors per residence weekly, necessitates advance registration and sanctioned guest passes that I proposed registering the boys as prolonged guests, which appeared sufficiently reasonable. However, Karen demonstrated no interest in reasonable approaches. She declared that no exceptions existed, reviewing her clipboard as though it held the sacred commandments. Pool access is immediately revoked for property 47 awaiting compliance evaluation. The sound of pool seats as additional residents abruptly discovered their phones captivating. The musty odor of anxiety. Nobody desired becoming Karen's subsequent target. Miguel and his companions silently collected their towels, feeling humiliated and bewildered. That evening, Karen displayed an official notification on the community bulletin. Pool access suspended for property 47 awaiting compliance evaluation. She additionally made a declaration at the weekly HOA assembly emphasizing my inability to adhere to established protocols with sufficient theatrical disappointment to clarify who should be perceived as the antagonist. Positioned in that basement community facility, surrounded by anxious neighbors and the odor of stale coffee, I recognized this transcended pool regulations. This concerned authority, dominance, and establishing the newcomer's position. Karen had just committed her initial error. She had provoked a confrontation with someone who had dedicated 20 years managing intimidators who concealed themselves behind agreements and technical language. The moment had arrived to revive some previous abilities. Karen demonstrated no hesitation in intensifying matters. 3 days following the pool situation, I discovered an official correspondence in my postal box. Certified postal delivery, remarkably. She had arranged a compliance hearing with the HOA board, providing me precisely 48 hours advance notification. The hearing was established for Thursday at 7 during the evening. Thursday represented Sarah's birth date. I had intended to visit her burial site, perhaps deliver those sunflowers she cherished, dedicate some peaceful time conversing with her about Miguel and how satisfied she would feel about the young gentleman he was developing into. The correspondence referenced multiple violations I had seemingly overlooked. Waste containers apparent from the roadway. They weren't. Lawn elevation surpassing 3½ inches. I had personally measured it at 3.2. And my preferred example, inability to sustain community tranquility through suitable guest administration. That evening, I performed what any competent attorney executes when confronting a hostile adversary. I examined the technical details. Every page of the HOA materials I had authorized at closing, along with the original community constitution. 20 years of construction law instructs you that problems consistently exist in the specifics, and Karen had just provided me a guide to her vulnerabilities. Concealed on page 47 of the Constitution, I located valuable information. Appropriate provisions shall be furnished for family assemblies and intergenerational household functions. Karen's visitor policy explicitly contradicted the foundational documentation she professed to be implementing. Superior still, her official correspondence violated no fewer than 3 procedural prerequisites: inadequate notification duration, inability to identify which regulation was purportedly violated, an arrangement during what any logical individual would regard as a family crisis timeframe. Thursday evening, I entered Karen's dining area, because seemingly we were executing official HOA operations in her personal dwelling, transporting a manila envelope with every pertinent document emphasized and indexed. The odor of her lavender air treatment was so intense I questioned if she was attempting to conceal something alternative. Perhaps corruption possesses a scent. The board appeared uneasy. Jim Walsh, the president and a recently retired secondary school educator, maintained shifting in his seat. Maria Santos, our financial officer and a straightforward accountant, documented notes with the concentration of someone recording proof. Karen's spouse, Brad, was absent, likely intelligent enough to preserve believable denial. Karen initiated with a PowerPoint display. I'm not exaggerating. She possessed actual presentation slides about preserving community criteria and maintaining property valuations. Every third slide contained a thinly disguised reference to particular residents who didn't comprehend our lifestyle. The noise of her groomed fingernails striking against the wooden table generated this annoying pattern that corresponded with her patronizing vocal tone flawlessly. When she concluded her demonstration, I silently rose and commenced distributing documents. Prior to continuing, I stated, I would appreciate indicating several procedural infractions in this evening's hearing. Initially, HOA operations cannot be performed in a board participant's private dwelling without advance community notification. Subsequently, the 48-hour notification duration violates our regulations, necessitating 7 days minimum notification for compliance hearings. Third, the purported violations referenced in your correspondence don't align with any particular regulation language. Jim Walsh displayed interest. Dave, are you suggesting this hearing lacks validity? I'm suggesting that if we plan to implement regulations, we should likely adhere to them ourselves. I accessed my envelope and extracted the emphasized Constitution pages. Based on the foundational documentation we all consent to, I quoted, appropriate provisions shall be furnished for family assemblies and intergenerational household functions. My nephew's pool day with 2 companions falls directly under this protection. Karen's complexion flushed. That language has become obsolete. We've subsequently modified, I interrupted respectfully. The original Constitution can exclusively be altered by a community-wide ballot. Has such a ballot occurred? Silence prevailed. Maria Santos raised her gaze from her documentation and indicated negatively. This location marks where Karen committed her critical mistake. Rather than recognizing the procedural matters and arranging a suitable hearing, she shifted to personal assault. Perhaps Mr. Martinez experiences difficulty adapting to community existence following his recent bereavement. Possibly the pressure of acquiring new regulations is overwhelming. The space became absolutely silent. Even Karen's advocates appeared uncomfortable. You could perceive the air conditioning system activating in the distance. I collected my documents gradually, intentionally. I appreciate everyone's time. I'll be examining our community constitution more completely, and we'll maintain contact. The ballot resulted 4-2 supporting the pool prohibition, with Jim Walsh and Maria Santos opposing. However, something had transformed. Karen had exposed her authentic nature, and the board had witnessed a preview of what they were genuinely managing. That evening, I accessed my laptop and initiated the variety of thorough investigation I hadn't performed since my final significant construction deception case: HOA establishment materials, municipal registrations, Karen's property sales transaction records. Everything existed as public documentation if you understood where to search. By 2 during the morning, I had discovered the initial thread. Karen Mitchell Realty had served as the sole sales representative during Willowbrook's construction stage. Sole arrangements like that typically accompanied financial motivations. The moment had arrived to examine precisely what those motivations had been. Karen's subsequent action arrived more rapidly than I anticipated. Within a week, she had structured what she labeled a community surveillance patrol. 3 residents with clipboards and photographic devices recording every minor deviation from HOA regulations throughout the community. Abruptly, individuals were receiving violation notifications for matters that had been disregarded for years. Basketball equipment stored in garages, but observable through windows. Garden decorations surpassing the 2-decoration restriction. Holiday illuminations still displayed in July. However, I was receiving particular attention. Daily passages, photographs of my property from various perspectives, printed cautions positioned under the windshield cleaners of anyone who visited me. Miguel initiated joking that Karen was pursuing us. However, I could observe it was affecting him. A 16-year-old shouldn't need to concern himself about generating difficulty for his uncle simply by existing. The intimidation initiative was producing its desired impact on the community as well. Anxiety was distributing like a disease. Neighbors who previously waved from their driveways abruptly discovered their phones captivating when I walked past. The separation was becoming observable. Recent residents supporting Karen's criteria, while the original property owners whispered their apprehensions in grocery establishment corridors. That moment marked Maria Santos approaching me following one of my morning walks. She's a diminutive woman with resilience in her character, the variety of accountant who could identify a discrepancy from 3 counties distant. Dave, she stated quietly, surveying around like we were organizing a theft. We need to converse. There exist matters about this HOA's finances that don't calculate correctly. While Karen was occupied performing security personnel, I was executing what construction attorneys execute optimally, pursuing the financial trail. I had positioned discrete surveillance cameras around my property, completely lawful in Texas, incidentally, and commenced recording Karen's patrol timetable. Every passage, every photograph, every intimidation method, all timestamped and recorded. Here's a legal information most individuals don't recognize. HOA implementation procedures necessitate written cautions prior to penalties being imposed. Karen's verbal intimidation and immediate pool prohibition violated procedural requirements under state legislation. One statement conclusion: record everything because HOA board participants can be maintained accountable for procedural infractions that I additionally initiated quietly connecting with Jim Walsh and Maria Santos. It appears I wasn't the initial resident to encounter Karen's particular variety of community governance. Jim shared accounts about families who had relocated elsewhere rather than manage her intimidation. Maria suggested financial abnormalities, however, required time to assemble proof. The pool situation that transformed everything occurred on a Friday afternoon. Miguel and his companions had delayed until designated family periods to utilize the pool, everything according to regulations. They were quietly enjoying the water when Karen materialized with her clipboard and two patrol volunteers, like some variety of HOA tactical team. "Depart the pool immediately," she declared, her vocal projection carrying across the water. Property 47 remains under pool access suspension. The boys complied without dispute. Miguel had instructed them effectively about not intensifying conflicts. However, Karen wasn't satisfied with compliance. She pursued them to my residence, her entourage accompanying, voices increasing with each movement. By the moment they reached my driveway, half the community was observing from windows. Karen was in complete theatrical manner, motioning wildly and discussing particular varieties of individuals who don't comprehend community criteria. This location marks where my legal education activated. Rather than participating in a shouting confrontation, I extracted my phone and initiated recording. "Karen," I stated calmly, "the HOA's legal responsibility is to furnish equal access to community facilities for all residents in acceptable standing. Can you reference the particular regulation that validates ongoing pool access suspension?" She maintained ranting. However, now she was executing it on camera. "This transcends pool regulations, Mr. Martinez. This concerns individuals who correspond with our community principles and individuals who don't." Three neighbors emerged from their residences, clearly disturbed by Karen's vocal tone and the implications of her statements. Mrs. Chin from across the roadway indicated her head in revulsion. The Johnsons, a young black couple who had relocated in previous spring, exchanged understanding expressions. "If you can't manage your visitors," Karen continued, oblivious to the expanding audience, "perhaps this community isn't suitable for you." I transmitted the recording to the HOA board that evening with a formal grievance about intimidation and prejudicial implementation. The electronic message was professional, thorough, and recorded Karen's behavioral pattern with timestamps and observer testimonies. The emergency board assembly was scheduled for the subsequent Tuesday. Karen's justification was foreseeable. She was safeguarding the community from external influences and property valuation threats. When the ballot arrived on formal censure, it resulted 3-3 with Karen abstaining. No action implemented. However, something significant had transformed. Following the assembly, Maria Santos transferred me a manila envelope. "Financial materials," she whispered. "Examine the construction agreements versus actual facility expenses. Subsequently inform me what you conclude." That evening, I distributed those materials across my dining area table and experienced the familiar excitement of identifying the inconsistencies that would unravel everything. The figures told a narrative Karen definitely didn't desire anyone to examine. Karen's subsequent action was her ultimate option, submitting a formal grievance with city code implementation alleging multiple infractions at my property. False accusations about unauthorized alterations and commercial operations. The grievance was submitted on a Monday. The examination was arranged for Friday. Friday represented Miguel's graduation celebration. I had organized a small commemoration for approximately 20 family participants, aunts, uncles, cousins traveling from across Texas to commemorate Miguel heading off to engineering university. Sarah would have cherished observing our family assembled like this. Watching Miguel radiate with satisfaction as he discussed his college intentions, Karen was aware of the celebration. The complete community was aware. That's precisely why she had scheduled the examination to correspond with our family assembly. At 2 during the afternoon, just as Miguel was dividing his graduation cake, a city code implementation vehicle entered my driveway. Behind it, Karen's automobile. She had arrived to observe the performance, anticipating violations to be discovered in front of my complete extended family. The examiner, a weathered gentleman named Bob who appeared like he'd prefer being anywhere alternative, emerged with his clipboard and photographic device. "I apologize for interrupting your celebration, sir. I received a grievance about unauthorized alterations and overcrowding infractions. 20 years of construction law had equipped me for this moment. I disappeared into my residence and returned with a banker's container full of materials, original architectural diagrams, every authorization from the city, examination certificates, even the final occupancy correspondence. Here's every authorization and examination documentation for this property," I informed Bob, positioning the container on my porch table. "Feel unrestricted to compare the actual construction to the sanctioned diagrams." Miguel, bless him, had extracted his phone and initiated live broadcasting the complete examination on Instagram. "Individuals, you're not going to accept this," he narrated to his followers. "Some woman contacted code implementation on my uncle's graduation celebration. The examination continued 2 hours. Bob verified electrical connections, measured room proportions, examined the plumbing installations, even ascended into the attic to authenticate HVAC placement. Throughout it all, Karen remained nearby, occasionally proposing locations he should search more intensively for infractions. Here's another legal information. When someone submits false code implementation grievances, they can be maintained accountable for the expense of unnecessary examinations. One statement conclusion: frivolous grievances often reverse when the property is actually in flawless compliance. As Bob worked, neighbors initiated assembling. Mrs. Chun delivered lemonade for my family. The Johnsons proposed their children's assistance cleaning celebration decorations. Even some of Karen's typical advocates appeared uncomfortable with the spectacle she generated. Miguel's live broadcast was acquiring viewers by the minute. Comments flooded in from his secondary school companions, college classmates, even random individuals who'd encountered the broadcast. "This woman is insane," read one comment. "Prosecute her," suggested another. The moment of truth arrived when Bob concluded his examination. No infractions. 0. My residence surpassed all code prerequisites. I'd ensured that during construction, recognizing my attorney background would make me a target for precisely this variety of intimidation. Bob appeared genuinely humiliated as he approached Karen. "Ma'am, I don't recognize who provided you this information. However, this property is in flawless compliance. Actually, it's one of the superior constructed residences I've examined this year." That moment marked Karen's most substantial error yet. Rather than gracefully accepting the results, she publicly disputed with the examiner. "You need to search more intensively," she insisted, her vocal projection rising. "Verify the garage once more. Verify the pool apparatus. There must exist infractions." The live broadcast captured everything. Karen's increasingly unhinged behavior, her demands that the examiner discover something, her obvious disappointment when her strategy failed. Miguel's comment section exploded with viewers sharing their own HOA horror accounts. However, here's what Karen didn't recognize. During the examination, my construction-educated perception had noticed something that would transform everything. The original architectural diagrams Bob was comparing to my residence showed significant inconsistencies with the community facilities. The pool placement specifications didn't correspond with what was actually constructed. The community facility proportions were incorrect. The landscaping budget appeared inflated compared to what was actually placed. As our family commemoration continued into the evening, despite Karen's optimal efforts to destroy it, Maria Santos approached me near the grill where I was turning burgers for my relatives. "Dave," she stated quietly, "after observing this examination circus, I conclude you need to observe the remainder of the financial materials. There's a smoking weapon in those construction agreements that's going to astound your mind." That evening, After the final family participant had traveled home and Miguel had collapsed asleep, exhausted from his significant day, I positioned myself at my kitchen table with Maria's latest material distribution. What I discovered made my construction attorney blood turn cold. The HOA had been invoiced $2,100,000 for community facilities that actually required $1,400,000 to construct. $700,000 had disappeared into nothingness, and Karen Mitchell Realty had been involved in every transaction. The moment had arrived to cease performing defense and initiate the assault. The smoking weapon was concealing in plain sight, buried in a collection of electronic messages Maria had been quietly preserving for 3 years. I wasn't certain what I was examining until you mentioned the construction inconsistencies. Maria clarified as we positioned ourselves in my kitchen the subsequent morning, financial materials distributed across the table like proof in a murder investigation. However, observe this. She transferred me a printed electronic message sequence between Karen and the original developer, Sunset Construction. The subject heading read Revised Community Facility Pricing Confidential. My construction attorney brain initiated connecting points more rapidly than a supercomputer. The original HOA budget displayed $2,100,000 allocated for community facilities, pool, landscaping, community facility, playground. However, the actual construction invoices, the ones buried in Maria's files, showed expenses of only $1,400,000. $700,000 vanished. Here's the beautiful component, Maria continued, extracting bank statements. Observe Karen's personal account deposits during the construction stage. Large, irregular deposits, amounts that coincidentally correspond with the timing of HOA payments to the developer. Karen Mitchell Realty had received referral compensation and sales motivations that were 400% above normal property sales commission rates. However, the genuine smoking weapon was an electronic message Karen thought she deleted where she explicitly discussed profit distribution arrangements with Sunset Construction for inflated facility budgets that would be absorbed by HOA assessments over time. Here's a financial information that'll make your blood simmer. Developers frequently inflate community facility expenses and distribute the profits with insiders who dominate the approval process. One statement conclusion: always demand to observe actual construction invoices, not just budget projections, prior to sanctioning HOA special assessments. This transcended pool access anymore. This concerned systematic financial deception that had been extracting our community resources for 3 years. Every resident had overpaid for substandard facilities, and we were continuing to overpay through inflated HOA assessments designed to conceal the missing finances. There exists more, Maria stated grimly. The monthly landscaping agreement, the pool maintenance, even the snow extraction service, they're all overpriced by 30 to 40%, and Karen receives payments from every vendor. The pattern was clear. Karen's aggressive regulation implementation wasn't about preserving criteria. It concerned preventing examination of the financial abnormalities that were generating her wealth. Her intimidation initiative against me had intensified because my construction law background made me the one individual in the community capable of unraveling her strategy. "Why didn't you deliver this to the board earlier?" I inquired. Maria exhaled. "Because Karen dominates the board. Jim Walsh is honest, however outnumbered. Everyone alternative is either frightened of her or benefiting from her connections. I required someone with the legal expertise to comprehend what we were examining." The irony was delicious. Karen's attempts to silence me had actually motivated me to investigate the precise financial corruption she was attempting to conceal. Her intimidation initiative was proof of obstruction, and her prejudicial implementation patterns showed a deliberate pattern of targeting anyone who might question her authority as a construction attorney. I'd observed this variety of deception dozens of times. Developers and their inside conspirators inflating expenses, extracting profits, subsequently using aggressive methods to prevent discovery. The difference was that now I wasn't being compensated to investigate. This was personal. "What's our subsequent action?" Maria inquired. I examined the proof distributed across my table: electronic message confessions of profit distribution, bank documentation showing suspicious deposits, construction invoices proving expense inflation, a 3-year pattern of financial abnormalities totaling over $700,000. We're going to furnish the community precisely what Karen's been attempting to prevent, I stated. Complete financial transparency. Every resident possesses the entitlement to recognize where their finances went and who profited from overcharging them. And if she attempts to obstruct us, I smiled, experiencing more like my previous attorney self than I had since Sarah died. Subsequently, she'll be adding obstruction of justice to deception and embezzlement accusations. Karen selected the incorrect retired construction attorney to challenge. The moment had arrived to construct a case that would maintain in criminal court. Constructing a criminal deception case necessitates three elements: proof, allies, and patience. Fortunate for me, I dedicated 2 decades perfecting all three. Initial step: assemble the team. Maria Santos delivered the financial access and insider knowledge. Jim Walsh furnished board legitimacy and moral authority. I contributed 20 years of construction law expertise and an intimate knowledge of how deception strategies operate. Our initial strategy session occurred in my living area on a Tuesday evening. Surveillance cameras ensured privacy while we distributed materials across my coffee table like generals organizing a campaign. The odor of Maria's handmade tamales combined with the tension in the space. Nothing constructs conspiracy quite like comfort nourishment. Here's what we're managing, I clarified, indicating to the financial timeline I'd constructed. This isn't random theft. It's a sophisticated long-term embezzlement strategy with 3 revenue streams: inflated construction expenses, overpriced service agreements, and developer payments disguised as sales commissions. Jim Walsh indicated his head in disbelief. 700,000. That's almost 6,000 per residence. Actually, Maria corrected, it's worse. The ongoing overcharges signify we're being robbed every month through inflated assessments and service agreements. Here's a legal information that'll preserve you thousands. HOA board participants possess fiduciary responsibility to safeguard community financial interests, and residents possess legal entitlement to thorough financial documentation and independent examinations. One statement conclusion. If your HOA won't furnish transparent financial documentation, that's likely because they're concealing something worth discovering. Our strategy was multi-pronged. Criminal referral to the District Attorney's Department for deception and embezzlement, civil action to recover stolen finances plus damages, HOA governance reform to prevent future corruption, and most significantly, community education so residents comprehended their entitlements and could safeguard themselves. The key, I clarified, is constructing an airtight case prior to Karen recognizing what we're executing. We need to record everything, preserve all proof, and prepare for her inevitable retaliation. Step 2. Proof preservation. I instructed Maria how to utilize professional case administration software to structure financial materials. Every suspicious transaction, every overpriced agreement, every suspicious deposit, all cross-referenced and timestamped with supporting documentation. Meanwhile, Miguel had become our social media intelligence officer. That youth's digital native abilities were invaluable for tracking Karen's online activities and monitoring community sentiment. It appears Karen's social media displays about preserving criteria and problematic residents generated a beautiful timeline of intimidation that correlated flawlessly with my financial discoveries. Uncle Dave, Miguel stated one evening while updating our digital proof files, Karen's been displaying about you on Facebook almost daily. She's basically recording her own obstruction case. Step 3. Legal preparation. I retained Sarah Chun, a criminal defense attorney who specialized in white-collar crime. Not because I required defense, because I required someone who comprehended prosecution strategies and could assist me present proof in the format prosecutors prefer. This is actually quite substantial, Sarah informed me after examining our proof package. Financial deception, postal deception, conspiracy to defraud. The electronic message confessions alone are prosecutorial valuable material. Add the pattern of retaliation against whistleblowers and you've acquired federal accusations. The trap was elegant in its simplicity. We submitted formal public documentation requests for all HOA financial materials, completely lawful, entirely within our entitlements as residents. Karen would need to either comply, furnishing us official documentation of the deception, or obstruct, adding criminal accusations to her expanding legal difficulties. Step 4. Community preparation. Jim Walsh utilized his position as president to arrange a special board assembly about financial transparency and community apprehensions. The agenda was innocuous. However, the subtext was clear. We were delivering the conflict into the open. I dedicated evenings preparing presentation materials that would make complex financial deception accessible to residents without legal or accounting backgrounds. Charts showing where their finances went, comparisons between what they paid and what they received, simple clarifications of their legal entitlements to financial information. The goal isn't to confuse them with technical details, I clarified to our team. It's to show them how they've been robbed and what we can execute about it. Maria handled the financial forensics, generating a paper trail that would make prosecutors smile. Every inflated invoice, every suspicious payment, every payment disguised as legitimate business expense, all recorded with professional accounting precision. Meanwhile, I was working on the legal framework. Texas possesses substantial legislation safeguarding HOA residents from financial abuse. However, most individuals don't recognize their entitlements. I'd prepared template correspondences residents could utilize to demand financial transparency, clarified their entitlements to independent examinations, and outlined the legal remedies available for deception victims. The beauty of our strategy was that every action was completely lawful and within our entitlements as residents. Karen could attempt to retaliate. However, she'd be fighting residents exercising legitimate oversight of community finances. By the moment we were prepared to go public, we possessed sufficient proof to fill a federal prosecutor's dreams and sufficient community support to ensure Karen couldn't silence us through intimidation. The question wasn't whether we could prove Karen was stealing. The question was how much imprisonment time she'd acquire for it. Karen's desperation became observable the moment our public documentation requests contacted her desk. Within 48 hours, she'd contacted an emergency board assembly to propose disruptive resident extraction procedures with me as the obvious target. Her false narrative was almost impressive in its audacity. According to Karen, I was a mentally unstable widower utilizing my attorney tactics to harass honest volunteers and threaten community tranquility. She actually suggested that my grief over Sarah's death had made me paranoid and vindictive. The character assassination initiative distributed across social media like wildfire. Fake Facebook displays claiming I was organizing to prosecute individual residents. Whisper initiatives about my unstable mental state following my spouse's death. Fear-generating suggestions that my intimidation would result in increased insurance expenses for everyone. However, Karen's master strategy was the cultural dog whistles, subtle comments about particular residents not corresponding with community principles and the need to preserve our lifestyle. She never stated anything explicitly prejudicial, too intelligent for that. However, the implications were clear to anyone hearing. Here's where my legal education paid dividends. Rather than responding to the personal assaults, I continued methodical proof assembly while recording every one of Karen's statements. 20 years of construction law had instructed me that intimidators always intensify when their initial methods fail, and intensification leads to errors. The board assembly she contacted was standing capacity only. Information had distributed about the disruptive resident agenda, and everyone desired to observe the confrontation. The odor of nervous perspiration combined with industrial coffee generated an atmosphere thick enough to divide with a knife. That Karen's display included a formal proposal to implement disruptive behavior penalties, fines up to $1,000 for residents who undermine community tranquility through frivolous grievances or intimidation of volunteers. When she concluded, I rose with my manila envelope. Prior to the board considers any penalties, I stated calmly, I'd appreciate presenting some apprehensions about procedural infractions in tonight's assembly format. That I methodically outlined how Karen's proposed penalties violated procedural requirements under Texas Property Code, how the emergency assembly violated regulations necessitating 7 days notification for policy modifications, how the disruptive behavior language was unconstitutionally vague and could be utilized to silence any resident who questioned board decisions. More significantly, I continued, accessing my envelope. I possess recorded proof of a 3-year pattern of intimidation directed at residents who request financial transparency. The space went absolutely silent as I presented time-stamped documentation of Karen's intimidation initiative, her passage photography sessions, her intimidation of my visitors, her attempts to weaponize code implementation against my family assembly, Jim Walsh and Maria Santos, openly supported my position, demonstrating that the board unity Karen had counted on was fracturing. 3 other board participants appeared uncomfortable as they recognized they were being recorded making decisions based on personal vendettas rather than community interests. That moment marked Karen's critical mistake. Under pressure and confronting exposure, she lost her composure. "This is precisely what I'm discussing," she snapped. "Mr. Martinez is utilizing attorney intimidation methods to silence board participants who are attempting to safeguard this community from individuals who don't comprehend our criteria." I maintained recording. Let her excavate her own burial site. Following the assembly where Karen's proposals were balloted down 5-2, she cornered me in the parking vicinity. What she didn't recognize was that my phone was still recording. "Observe, Dave," she stated, her vocal projection dripping with fake apprehension. "Perhaps we can work out our differences. The HOA budget possesses some flexibility. We could arrange for your pool maintenance to be covered. Maybe assist with some landscaping expenses if you could just drop these grievances and let the board handle matters quietly." Attempted bribery on tape in front of observers. "That's a generous proposal, Karen," I replied carefully. "However, I conclude financial transparency benefits the complete community, not just individual residents." Her mask slipped completely. "If you don't retreat, you'll regret it. This community possesses methods of managing troublemakers, and my spouse possesses companions in city government who don't appreciate residents who waste municipal resources with frivolous grievances." Threat also on tape. The subsequent morning, Karen submitted a false law enforcement documentation claiming I had threatened her during our parking vicinity conversation. She scheduled the grievance flawlessly, right as I was possessing my morning coffee, ensuring maximum community visibility when the patrol automobiles arrived. However, Karen had finally committed the error I'd been anticipating. She'd weaponized law enforcement based on a demonstrably false grievance, and I possessed audio proof proving it. When the officers arrived at my entrance at 6 during the morning, I was prepared with my phone, my recording of the previous evening's conversation, and 20 years of experience managing individuals who thought connections could override proof. "Officers," I stated calmly, "I accept you're here about a grievance from Karen Mitchell. Prior to continuing, I'd appreciate you to hear the actual conversation she's complaining about. That Karen's overconfidence had just transferred me federal accusations for submitting false law enforcement documentation and obstruction of justice." The law enforcement officers heard my recording with expressions that transformed from skepticism to disbelief to barely contained anger. Nothing irritates law enforcement quite like possessing their resources weaponized for personal vendettas. "Ma'am," Officer Rodriguez informed Karen when they confronted her, "submitting false documentation is a criminal offense. We substantially advise you to reconsider any future grievances unless you possess actual proof of criminal activity." However, Karen was beyond rational thought. Confronting exposure of her financial crimes and the collapse of her community authority base, she initiated complete scorched earth manner. Her final desperation performance involved submitting a formal grievance with the city attorney's department, claiming I was threatening community safety and utilizing legal intimidation to undermine legitimate governance. She attempted to freeze HOA accounts to prevent me from accessing financial documentation, referencing ongoing legal threats as validation. When that failed, she contacted for emergency ballots of no confidence against Jim Walsh and Maria Santos, claiming they'd been compromised by the troublemaker. Her objective was to place a compliant board prior to the criminal investigation could continue.